What's up, everybody? We're back. Corey Hughes Bloody History. So, I started to stumble through the 2022 Kennedy document releases. And let me just comment on these post-2017 document releases that started with Trump. None of it's original. None of it's new at all. Maybe with very few exceptions. But what I'm noticing is that a lot of those documents are rehashes of documents that we've already got. I have also found the same document. You know, when I'm searching through a pool of about 1,500 PDFs of varying lengths, and I start coming across the very same document repeated 2 and 3 times under different numbers. What does that tell you? There's not really 1,500 documents there. There's a whole lot less because they just gave you a bunch of duplicates. I don't know if the fucking CIA or whoever the fuck is in charge of releasing this shit. I don't know if they just don't think people are going to read them all or what, but they release so much shit that really is irrelevant. And they're releasing stuff that's duplicated, not even into Kennedy files, but stuff that's not Kennedy related. Like all of the Nosenko files, the Soviet defector, which people love to talk about, but I fucking see no point in talking about it at all. Like, there's a whole bunch of those files in there. There's a whole bunch of the Soviet stuff that's got nothing to do with Kennedy stuck in there. And so, like I've said before, the only goddamn files I care about are the Dave Morales files, the Charles the Blade Taurine files that they're holding on to, and the Harry Haller files that all connect to Jack Valenti. That's all I give a fuck about. I'm sure there's more stuff that I don't know about. So I'm sure there's some unknowns out there. But for now, those 3 fucking sets of documents are the only things I care about. The only things I care about. And all they're going to do is show the relationships with Jack Valenti. And that's it. The Morales file might show his travel records, might show that he was not where he was supposed to be at the time of the assassination, because we all know where he was, right? On the side of the Secret Service car. So, today what we're going to do is we are going to look. This document claims to have been released under, let me see, it says a 2022 release under the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Act of 1992. Okay, so they passed the fucking act in 1992, but it took 30 years for them to release this. Like, this is why you shouldn't respect or avow by anything our government says or does, period. Like, just fuck them to death. Don't ever pay your taxes. Tell them to go suck a fucking dick. Challenge them to convict you in front of 12 of your peers. Right? Never going to happen. Never going to happen. They'll never convict me on fucking anything. Not when I get done with the jury. So, fuck them to death is what I'm saying. 30 years later for this motherfucker to come out, give me a break. And this I highly doubt is even, let me see, it says date of last review, 1/1/2003, right? So even that's 11 fucking years after the act was passed. So, this probably came out sometime in the last 20 years. Do I think it actually came out for the first time in 2022? No, this is probably a duplicate. It's HSCA record number 180-10110-10100. The HSCA has a lot of numbers that are surprisingly very similar to that. So, God, the way they put these HSCA and ARB and they put these fucking groups together to reanalyze this stuff, and they still come up with fucking nothing. Nothing. Idiots, all the way down. The subject of this document is Oswald Lee, post-Russian period travel trip to Mexico. Document type report, unclassified, restrictions 1A, current status redact. Date of last review 1/1/2003. Comments box 4. Scenario. Chronology of Oswald's visits to the Soviet and Cuban embassies. In handwriting, it says, with Danny, get exact documented visits and phone calls. And then on the right side, it says, looks like Edwin J. I can't read the last name. Lopez. Oh, is this part of the Lopez report that we're going to read? Prepared by Dan, looks like Hardway. This looks like it was just a chronology, but we will be covering the Lopez report, I believe, very soon. We might as well get all this Mexico City shit out of the fucking way. Maybe I'll break some of this Mexico City stuff up with some other topics, like, one day just to break it up, because ultimately, what are we getting here? We're getting different people saying the same shit. A whole bunch of CIA people saying, "Oh, I don't know. This. I think this is how the agency works. I was only there for 30 years, but I think this is how it worked." Right? Give me a break, you motherfuckers. Like, nothing was ever anybody's responsibility, right? And so by the time we get done reading the depositions of the dozen or so people who all were the fucking comprised the totality of the Mexico City team, and all of them pointing fingers at somebody else, going, "I don't know, this was his dude, this wasn't my deal, this was, I just blah, 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 blah," right? That's what they're going to end up fucking, that's what you're going to get out of it at the end. A whole bunch of blah, 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 a bunch of nothing. And those are the 12 fucking people, or give or take, that were running the entire fucking thing down there, right? So they all have the same story. It's like, it's mind fucking boggling. Like, really? The fucking CIA trusted this group of incompetent fucks to run Mexico City, the most important intelligence outpost in the Western Hemisphere? Really? Really? That's the story you're going to sell us? You put these dumb shits who don't know what the fuck their job was in charge of Mexico City, right? They ran the show down there. Unfucking believable. And you know why it's unbelievable? Because it truly is. It's not believable. That's the thing. It is not believable. They can't play the incompetence card here. They can't play the pass the buck card. They cannot deflect from their own. I mean, when you look at the systems that they had in place down there, they were so detailed. Call was recorded. Copies were made and sent to different people. From those copies, translations were made. Then those translations went to somebody's desk, and then they went to somebody else's desk, and then they went to another person's desk to double check everything, and then it got cabled up to Washington, where I'm sure it got received and sent out to a bunch of people, and everything was done under systems, right? But when it comes to Oswald's visits to the fucking embassies, oh my God, derp, we don't know. I fucking hate every last one of these fucking CIA cunts, because every single one of them was in on this thing with fucking Thornley down in Mexico City. And if they weren't in on it directly, they were in on the cover-up afterwards. They were told, this is what happened, this is the story, and that's how it's going to go, right? And so, and good pasture is the most frustrating. It makes you realize that women can be fucking disgusting, fucking rotten CIA spook motherfuckers too, right? Right? They're not always just a honeypot. She was definitely not fuckable, for sure. She was a case agent, but started out as a secretary or something like that, right? That's how these women moved up the ranks. They started out as secretaries, like in the OSS days. I guess that's why their loyalty lies with them, because they provided for 30 years. And I bet you in the CIA, I don't know. It doesn't strike me as the kind of place that, I don't know, I hesitate to say what I'm about to say, but it doesn't strike me as the kind of place that would, at least back in the 50s and 60s, would tolerate any kind of indiscretions that could compromise security. It seems to go against human nature, but still, you'd think that people fucking around within the agency, it was probably not encouraged. But who knows? Was everybody banging their secretary back then? I don't know. It's a possibility. Scenario: chronology of Oswald's visits to the Soviet and Cuban embassies. This is loaded, chock full of contradiction and stuff that can't exist if you believe their own official timeline, right? Like this first entry here. September 26th, 1963, Thursday. Now, let's ask this question. Where is Oswald supposed to have been on September the 26th? He is supposed to be on a bus en route to Mexico City and have crossed the border sometime in the middle of the night, September 26th, right? He does not arrive in Mexico City until September 27th, around 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay? Nonetheless, and I'll begin to read here, a man claiming to be Oswald visits the Cuban embassy between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. This is on September 26th, mind you, Thursday, when Oswald's on a bus. A man claiming to be Oswald visits the Cuban embassy between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. The visit probably occurs around 1 o'clock. Oswald, in quotations, is described as 5'6" tall, blonde hair, sunken cheeks, very thin, aquiline nose, very straight eyebrows, approximately 35 years old, and wearing a light blue Prince of Wales suit. He was said to look very cold with a hard face and a penetrating, cunning way of looking at you. Oswald, in quotes, was seeking an intra-transit visa to Cuba on his way to Russia. He displayed documents that showed his membership in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and the American Communist Party. He was told that he would have to first obtain a visa to Russia before he could be issued an intra-transit visa. He's also told that he should return to the Cuban embassy with his passport and a copy of a photograph in order to fill out the visa application. September 27th, 1963, Friday. Around 10:30 in the morning, Oswald, in quotes, calls the Soviet military attaché with whom he speaks in Spanish. He tells the SMA that he's looking for a visa to Odessa. The SMA tells him to call the consulate. Oswald, in quotes, asks for directions to the embassy and receives them. I am pausing right here for a second because it just hit me. I need to go back and double check the dates that Ferry's guy, the pilot. What the fuck is his name? Come on, Corey, don't start slipping now. His pilot, the guy who got his visa from the Mexican consulate in New Orleans on September the 17th, along with William Gaudet. It is my opinion that he flew Kerry Thornley in. Kerry Thornley was never on the bus. He flew Kerry Thornley in on that plane to Mexico City. That's why he got that visa. I forget the dates that he had on his visa. But it's my opinion that he flew Thornley there, and then Thornley ends up somehow making it across the border, where he then is picked up by Marina and the kid, or the car is left waiting for them there. So, who was this on September 26th? Was it Thornley? Not that I know of. Could it have been? This description doesn't really match. Thornley's 5'10", not blonde hair, but definitely light hair. I don't know about the sunken cheeks and the aquiline nose. Definitely not 35 years old, and I can't see him wearing a suit. Nor do I see him as having a hard face, but hey, you never know. 10:37, Oswald calls the Soviet consulate, asked to speak to the consul in Spanish. He's told that the consul is not in. He's told that he can call back at 11:30. Oswald says that he is looking for a visa to Odessa. All these Oswalds are in quotes, so it's already suspect by authorities that it wasn't Oswald, right? About 11:30, Oswald goes to the Russian embassy where he once again exhibits the documents he has already shown the Cubans, as well as other documents such as his and Marina's marriage license. Oswald discusses his situation with someone at the embassy and comes away with the understanding that everything would be expeditiously handled. Around 12:15, someone from the Soviet embassy calls Azcue, Azcue, whom he is aware of because of what Oswald has told him, and tells him that that they have to get authorization from Moscow to grant him a visa, and that it will probably take 4 months. Around 12:45, Oswald returns to the Cuban embassy with the photo and completes the visa application, stating that he would like to leave in 3 days. He asks Azcue about how long it will take to get the visa. Azcue explains his misconception to him. An argument results, and Azcue throws Oswald out. Duran feels sympathetic to Oswald, gives him... there's a bunch of things here that are crossed off, but they're still there, so I'm going to read them anyway. And her address is crossed off, but it says Duran feels sympathetic to Oswald, gives him her address, and promises to help in any way she can. She feels that Oswald should have been granted the visa with no problems, and that Azcue's actions are wrong. 1:25 p.m., Oswald calls the Soviet consulate in an attempt to find out what's gone wrong with the arrangement he thought he had. In Spanish, he asks for the consul. He's told that the consul is out and that he can be contacted between 4 and 5 on Mondays and Fridays. This call may have been from Duran's phone. If it was, he then told her that he could get hold of the Soviet he had his deal with, and would she be kind enough to talk to him. She said that she would, and to come back at 4 o'clock. If the call was not made, then Oswald got this message to Sylvia, and the same arrangements for Sylvia's 4 o'clock call were made. 4:05, Sylvia Duran calls the Soviet embassy. She tells them the American citizen, the one who wants a visa to Cuba in transit to Russia, is there. She asks who he talked to at the Soviet embassy when she sent him there to get a Soviet visa so he could get an in-transit visa to Cuba. She tells the official she is speaking with that man seeking the visa, and he wants to know with whom he spoke because he had been assured that there would be no problem. The man at the Soviet embassy puts another man on the phone, and Sylvia goes through it again. He tells her that her call will be returned. 4:26 p.m., a Soviet official returns Sylvia's call. The situation is explained to Sylvia. She realizes that she cannot give him a visa because of the delay on the Soviet end and the fact that he does not know anyone in Cuba. What does Sylvia tell Oswald, who is still sitting there waiting? In light of subsequent events, it was probably something that would keep his hopes up. At night, Oswald goes to a party at Reuben Duran's with Sylvia and 2 American friends. This may have been, more likely was, the night of the 26th. He is seen by Elena Guerrero de Paz. He spends the night with Sylvia. That's interesting because from going through the stuff that we've gone through so far, I kind of got the impression that the party wasn't the 26th, that it was the previous visit that he had there, right? It was maybe the 26th of August, but not September. Because nothing about what we read indicated to me that this party was while Oswald was there, right? That's why it was a big deal. That's why it was a big deal in the first place, because it put Oswald there at a time when Oswald isn't supposed to have been there. That's what I got from reading all the stuff before. Perhaps they had to readjust the date to September 26th just to align with when Oswald is known to have been there. But Oswald wasn't there the night of the 26th. Oswald didn't get there till 27th at 10 a.m. in the morning, according to the official story. So that date is fucked up. That date is fucked up. And this is what date? This is the 27th that we just went through, which is the day he arrives. And so now we're up to the next day, September 28th, 1963, Saturday, 11 o'clock in the morning. Oswald is back at the Soviet embassy, bugging them to expedite his visa. They send him back to the Cuban embassy to get an address. 11:51 a.m., Duran calls the Soviet consulate and puts Oswald on the phone. He tells him that he is returning to the Soviet embassy with the address. Around 12 o'clock noon, Oswald returns to the Soviet embassy and is assured that a telegram will be sent and that it will be handled as quickly as possible. In the afternoon, Oswald decides that he needs more help and tracks down a revolutionary pro-Castro Cuban group on the campus of the University of Mexico. Maybe he hopes that he can find someone who will say they know him in Cuba. In any case, he seeks some sort of assistance from these pro-Castroites. He spends the night with them. That's very interesting, because there's another person down there in Mexico City at this time, sent there probably by naval intelligence, whose name was Oswald with two S's, Osswald, and his assignment was to go down to the university campus and hand out flyers and such. So when I hear this, and I'll try to dig that up to do a show on that one, because that's pretty interesting. There's another Mexican Oswald and Osvaldo somewhere up in the mix too. Oswald decides he needs more help and tracks down a revolutionary pro-Castro Cuban group on the campus of the University of Mexico. Yeah, that doesn't... When I start to see pieces of different tales within the story of the Kennedy assassination getting mixed, my alarm bells start to go off, and that's what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing this possibly a mixing of the story with the other Oswald, which I'll have to dig all that stuff up. But if you want to go try to look for that, Oswald, and the guy was sent down to Mexico City on assignment to hand out flyers on a campus at the same time that this Oswald was, right? Give me a fucking break. And he was admitted in naval intelligence. So, yeah, fucking, if you want to pull the documents on that, I'd appreciate that. And that's fucking hilarious. September 29th, 1963, Sunday morning, Oswald spends the day with the pro-Castro group. That sounds like total bullshit. And I don't see Kerry Thornley doing that either. Sunday afternoon, evening, and night is a question mark. So there's no record on what Oswald did that Sunday at all. September 30th, Monday. Note the association with the Cuban group could have been any time between the afternoon of 9:28 and the afternoon of 9:30. Contreras said that he met Oswald in the afternoon and spent the rest of the day that night and part of the next day with him. Contreras. Guys, let's pull everything on Contreras who say they met Oswald in Mexico City, please. October 1st, 1963, 10:31 a.m. This is Tuesday. Oswald calls the Soviet military attaché inquiring about a telegram. He is referred to the consulate. Oswald calls the consulate with the same inquiry and learns that the telegram has been sent but no reply has been received. He is discouraged. Obiedkov hangs up on him. And then the next one is later or earlier. It doesn't indicate which. Oswald calls the man with whom he had made his arrangement and discusses the assistance that was promised him. He is dangled, and the man eventually hangs up on him. Later or on the 2nd, which is Wednesday, Oswald leaves Mexico. Then it says on or about 9:30:63, and then there's a heading. It says this may have happened, and then it says MCS receives a transcript in which Sylvia Duran discusses an American and his problem with the Soviet consul. When Scott writes, "Can we identify?" on transcript, Good Pastor notifies Flick that an American is apparently trying to get a visa, and that COS would like to ID. The Cuban and Soviet monitors are asked to notify Flick of any conversation involving an American or in English, etc. However, and then on October the 1st, 63, it says, Flick is notified by a monitor that there is an English conversation on the Soviet tap. Flick listens and hears the man ID himself as Oswald. He pulls the tape and marks it urgent and notifies Goodpaster that they have an ID on an American. The tape is delivered to Tarasov for immediate transcription. It is received late this day or early on the 2nd by Goodpaster. Disposition of tape unknown. Could urgent tapes have been routinely retained for a longer period? ? Goodpaster now has ID, but does not know for sure that it is the one that Scott has asked about. The guy in the 927 conversation sounds real interesting, but there is nothing in this conversation that clearly connects. She discusses reporting it with Manel. There is by some disagreement over whose responsibility it is to report. Either decision is made or conflict continues until photo is checked. And the note here says, Goodpaster ties in 928 Soviet conversation, re-address. 10-7-63. Photos from 10-1, 10-2, 10-3, and 10-4 are received in base from Soviet embassy. 10-8-63. B. Manel drafts report cable. Goodpaster adds paragraph 2. 10-10-63. In parentheses it says, in interim, Goodpaster tries to ID MMM photo. How? HQ response received. Descriptions don't match. Controversy in station on whether Oswald's same. 927 and 928 conversation tied definitely in to Lee Harvey Oswald during this week. And then in handwriting, by similarity of substantive content of cable and conversation and voice comparisons. 10-16-63. Oswald's P file opened, his personality file. 10-18-63. By this time, photo of MMM received at station. Goodpaster picks it up on it. This MMM photo, one from Cubem, C-U-B-E-M-B, on 10-15. 10-21-63. Let's see what if we can figure out what Cubem is. C-U-B-E-M-B on 10-15 means. And then 10-21-63. 10-15 MMM shown to penetration agents by this time. What response? MCS cables. HQ asking for a photo of Lee Harvey Oswald. For what purpose? Was it just to compare to surveillance photos? Were they planning on showing to penetration agents? Why? Note, quite a few people say interest level was high, so what actions were taken? Interesting. All right, so the rest of this document just goes back to summary of David Atlee Phillips' testimony. From 78. I think it was, we already went over 78, and it was 76 that we were going to go over. Let me see if I can just read the first couple paragraphs, see if there's anything of note here before we move on. Mr. Phillips was reminded CIA omnibus release letter was still applied to our discussion. Phillips was asked about his activities in Mexico and related to his job of Chief of Covert Actions. Yeah, we went over all this stuff already. Okay, so now we have another document from the 2022 release. Analysis of Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City. So we went over his alleged timeline, which to me there's some weird contradictory stuff. And enough people have gone over Mexico City. God, this is another thing I hate. A ton of people have gone over Mexico City, and this book's written about it and all this shit, and nobody's obviously figured out nothing, right? So I feel like I'm getting forced into fucking doing another deep dive and in detail expose on what really fucking happened in Mexico City, because nobody else obviously put two and two together on it. But what this document is here says this form is to be used for material extracted from CIA-controlled documents. So this is a CIA document. CIA has no objection to declassification. Yeah, this is a CIA document analysis of Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico. So, introduction. After the Warren Commission investigation published its report, two very important allegations related to Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City came to the attention of the United States investigative agencies. In 1964, Elena Guerrero de Paz reported that she had seen Lee Harvey Oswald, accompanied by two other men, at a party at the home of Ruben Duran Navarro, the brother-in-law of Sylvia Duran. In 1967, Oscar Contreras Lartigue, Lartigue, reported that he met Lee Harvey Oswald on the campus of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. In addition, the testimony of the Warren Commission's primary witness related to Mexico City, Sylvia Tirado Duran, has been called into question by the critics throughout the years, and that's written in handwriting. This is also written by hand. Some of the information that is inconsistent with Ms. Duran's original story, that Oswald visited the consulate on 2 occasions, which were the only times she saw him, was available at the time of the Warren Commission's inquiry, although it was ignored. Some of the information has developed. There's another handwritten note up in the column here, but it's scratched out, and it says, unclear, does this example relate to her story on this inconsistent evidence that has been developed? All right, moving on. The Guerrero and Contreras allegations in conjunction with the weakening of Ms. Duran's story raise 3 major questions. Did Lee Harvey Oswald, or an imposter, visit the Cuban consulate in Mexico City? Other than his visits to the Cuban consulate, what were Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City? And was Lee Harvey Oswald traveling alone in Mexico City? These 3 questions somewhat overlap in detail. If Oswald was not traveling alone, did one of his companions impersonate him at the Cuban consulate? So just to pause right here. The CIA themselves, remember, it's an organization where the right hand doesn't always know what the left hand is doing, right? And any internal investigation kind of stuff would probably steer away from them at all. But at least here, it's obvious they were somewhat aware of the possibility that Oswald was being impersonated in Mexico City, right? And that Oswald was never actually there. That is something that was on their radar for sure. In an attempt to answer these questions, the House Select Committee on Assassinations has interviewed Mexican and Cuban citizens who could have knowledge of Oswald's visits to the Cuban consulate, interviewed Mexican citizens who could have knowledge of Oswald's activities and associations in Mexico City, conducted an extensive review of the files of the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI that pertained to Oswald's sojourn in Mexico City. And B, did Lee Harvey Oswald, or an imposter, contact the Cuban and Soviet consulates in Mexico City? Lee Harvey Oswald himself probably visited the Cuban consulate at least once since his application for a Cuban in-transit visa bears his signature. Though the Cuban consulate allowed visa applicants to take blank applications out of the consulate to be returned when completed, Sylvia Duran stated she was certain that Oswald signed the application in her presence. That came from an HSCA interview of Sylvia Duran, 6678, JFK document 311681. Oswald's signature on the Cuban visa application, however, does not by itself rule out the possibility that someone impersonated Oswald in contacts with the Cuban and Soviet embassies. An analysis of the telephone conversations which the CIA's Mexico City station intercepted by tapping the Soviet consulate and the Soviet military attaché's telephone reveals that someone, later identified as Oswald, visited the Cuban consulate at least 2 times and the Soviet consulate at least 3 times. Testimony would tend to indicate that Oswald or someone impersonating him visited the Cuban consulate at least 1, possibly 2 additional times on September 27, 1963. Sylvia Duran says that Oswald first visited the Cuban consulate at approximately 11 a.m. requesting an in-transit visa to Cuba, with Russia as the final destination. Ms. Duran sent Oswald to obtain photographs that he needed for the visa application. Eusebio Azcu recalls that this visit probably occurred on the date on the visa application 9/27/63. And that's from his public testimony on 9/18/78. Then you have a paragraph here scratched out. It says, although unlikely, if someone impersonated Oswald in Mexico, it is possible that the individual's first visit occurred before Oswald's arrival. Ooh, it is unlikely because such actions would have been poor tradecraft. Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yes, poor tradecraft indeed. That's exactly what it was. Ms. Duran also stated that Oswald returned at approximately 1 p.m. with 4 photographs. That's from the Duran interview 6678. Eusebio Azcu also stated that the individual, later identified as Oswald, returned to the Cuban consulate about 1 p.m. with the photographs, probably on, quote, the date that appears on the application, that is to say the 27th. The argument between Azcu and the individual probably occurred during this visit. And it says here in handwriting, the committee believes that there is a possibility. That's all it says. It believes that's a possibility. Ms. Duran stated that Oswald's third and last visit occurred in the late afternoon after working hours on the 27th. This visit is confirmed by the CIA's tap on the Soviet consulate. In addition to the alleged Oswald visits to the consulates, there were other telephonic contacts that may have been between Oswald or an imposter and the consulates. Several details about Oswald's visits to the Cuban consulate and telephonic contacts with both consulates indicate that the individual involved may not have been Oswald. Sylvia Duran's description of Oswald did not resemble Oswald's true physical appearance. This description, which appeared early in the reporting of information obtained from Ms. Duran, was deleted from subsequent reports and was not at all mentioned in the Warren report. Eusebio Azcu's description of Oswald was similar to Sylvia Duran's, but more detailed. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about these descriptions is their similarity to Elena Guerra de Paz's description of one of Oswald's alleged companions. Then there's something here that's really redacted, and I can't barely read what it says. Something, something, something above and something by below. That's all I can read. And then it says, note, a blonde man on Knoll if found. Whatever. Another possible indication that an imposter may, as I can't read this, it's scratched off and it's kind of blurry. Another possible indication that an imposter was something well as Oswald visited the consulate is the 9/28/63 intercepted conversation. Sylvia Duran adamantly denies that Oswald visited the Cuban consulate on Saturday, September 28th. In light of the CIA intercept of that date, Ms. Duran has either lied to the committee or the individual who visited the consulate on September 18th was not Oswald. Then there's a scratched out note. It says, note, the CIA's classification of the transcript of this conversation prevented the HSCA from directly confronting Ms. Duran with the information. Ms. Duran, in light of the inconsistencies detailed in sections 5C and 6 and above may not be most the credible witness, but there are indications that she was truthful when she stated that Oswald did not visit the consulate on September 28th. The September 28th, 1963 conversation was linked to Oswald because of the marginal notations made by the CIA translator on the transcript. The translator noted on the transcript that the caller spoke, okay, but between these two pages, there's an insert here. So let me read what the insert is in handwriting. It says, insert, the committee notes the possibility, but does not conclude whether that the missing production from the Pulse camera and the LI Lyric bass has anything to do with the possibility that someone impersonated Oswald in Mexico. All right, the caller spoke terrible, hardly recognizable Russian. On October 1st, 63, a man called the Soviet consulate and identified himself as Lee Oswald. This man also stated that he had been at the consulate on Saturday the 28th. The translator noted that this was the same man who had called the consulate a day or so ago and had spoken in broken Russian. From this information and possibly a voice comparison, the 928 caller was identified as Oswald. The problem with assuming that the caller on 928 and 101 was Oswald is that Oswald spoke fluent Russian. Granted, Ms. Duran's denial of the Saturday visit and the proficiency of the caller's Russian is not sufficient evidence to conclude that the person who visited the Cuban consulate on Saturday and who called the Soviet consulate on Saturday on October 1st was an imposter. Yet the information is sufficient to seriously question the assumption that it was Oswald, especially in light of Askew and Duran's descriptions of Elena Guerrero de Paz's allegation. 3 calls that also occurred early on September 27, 1963 may have been made by an imposter. At approximately 10:30 a.m., a man called the Soviet military attaché looking for a visa to Odessa and was referred to the Soviet consulate. At 10:37 a.m., a man called the Soviet consulate and asked for a visa to Odessa. He was told to call back at 11 o'clock a.m. At 1:25 p.m., a man called the Soviet embassy and was told the consulate would return between 4 and 5 p.m. that day. While only the caller's requests for a visa to Russia, Odessa, connect these calls to Oswald, the HSCA believes that they do fit logically into a time sequence created by what is known from testimony and the electronic intercepts about his actions on that day. The following is a reasonable possible chronology of Oswald's actions on 9/27/63 based on analysis of available evidence. Oswald probably arrived in Mexico around 10 a.m. on September 27th. By 10:30, Oswald had time to arrive at the Hotel de Comercio and place a call to the Soviet military attaché, who referred him to the consul. The military attaché also gave the caller directions to the consulate. During the 10:37 a.m. call to the consulate, the caller learned that he could contact the Soviet consulate at 11 a.m. This done, Oswald then visited the Cuban consulate, where he arrived around 11 a.m. On his way to the Soviet consulate, where he arrived. He arrived at around 11 a.m. That came from the interview of Sylvia Duran. This meeting only lasted approximately 15 minutes. And there's a note here in the column. Let me see if I can read it. It says, "How did something find something the 11 o'clock Soviet possibility, something 11 o'clock Cuban?" Question mark. There's a bunch of scratches over it. I can't really read it. And then from the public testimony of Alfredo Mirabel Diaz, that's who that came from, 9/18/78. Alfredo Mirabel Diaz. And sent Oswald to obtain photographs and then to the Russian embassy to get the necessary Russian visa. Oswald returned to the Cuban consulate around 1 p.m. At this point, he had his encounter with Askew and completed his visa application. Oswald probably realized at this point that he would have problems obtaining the visas after this visit to the Cuban consulate, which lasted approximately 15 minutes. Oswald tried to contact the Soviet consul, whom Oswald claimed had assured him that he would have no problems obtaining a visa, hence the 1:25 p.m. call. During this conversation, Oswald learned that the consul would be in that evening between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Oswald returned to the Cuban consulate at 4 o'clock, and Sylvia Duran called to intercede with the Soviet consul on his behalf. Hence the 405 and 426 calls involving Duran. But there's a problem with attributing the first 3 calls on September 27th, 1963 to Oswald. The conversations were all in Spanish. With the exception of the testimony of Delgado, the evidence indicates Oswald did not speak Spanish. Hence, either the above detailed calls were not made by Oswald, or Oswald could speak Spanish. There's not enough evidence to firmly conclude that someone did impersonate Oswald in Mexico. On the other hand, the evidence is of such a nature that the possibility cannot be dismissed. Let me see. Then in the column where it talks about Delgado, it says here, it's not this black and white. There is more evidence that he may have spoken it. Well, really? What is that evidence? That evidence points to Kerry Thornley, my friends. And C, what were Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City? When the Warren Commission wrote about Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City, it concluded, quote, by Saturday, September 28th, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald had failed to obtain visas at both the Cuban and Soviet embassies. From Sunday, September 29th through Wednesday morning, October 2nd, when he left Mexico City on a bus bound for the United States, Oswald spent considerable time making his travel arrangements, sightseeing, and checking again with the Soviet embassy to learn whether anything had happened on his visa application. Subsequent to the Warren Commission's report, the allegations of Elena Guerrero and Oscar Contreras Lartigue came to the attention of the U.S. investigative agencies. The main allegation of both these people, that they met Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City, remains to this day without direct corroboration, yet the committee feels that it cannot dismiss these allegations without giving them any consideration for several reasons illustrated below. The testimony of Sylvia Duran and the Cuban consulate officials Askew and Maribel place Oswald's last contact with the Cuban embassy on Friday evening, September 27, 1963. The transcripts from the CIA's wiretaps on the Soviet consulate place Oswald's last visits to the Soviet and Cuban consulates on Saturday morning, September 28, 1963. Oswald's last telephonic contact with the Soviet consulate came on Tuesday, October 1st, 1963. Oswald's activities on the days between September 28th and October 1st are not clearly recorded. And then here it says, there's a handwritten note, cite Liebler memo on this gap in the Warren Commission, invest in a footnote. The Warren Commission speculated that he spent most of his time sightseeing and making travel arrangements. It is entirely possible that Oswald did spend some of his time during the weekend sightseeing and making his travel arrangements. It's also entirely possible that after his failure to obtain his visas on Saturday, September 28th, that Oswald did not give up completely and did attend a party where he would have come into contact with the Cuban consular officials and later sought help from pro-Castro students. It's entirely possible that Ruben Duran had a twist party on September 30th or October 1st, as Elena Guerrero had claimed. Ruben, Horacio, Lydia, and Sylvia Duran all admitted that they frequently had twist parties in 1963. This line is crossed out. It should be noted that this party allegedly occurred on a night when Oswald's activities are not known. Only Sylvia Duran recalled Elena Guerrero attending any of these twist parties at the Duran home. She recalled Elena and Elena's daughter, Elenita, attending one twist party at Ruben's home in 1963. The other Durans adamantly deny that Lee Harvey Oswald had been at a twist party at one of their homes. Many of the details of Elena Guerrero's allegations have not been or cannot be corroborated. For example, Elena's allegation that some of the people who had been at the party were taken to Veracruz under the protection of Governor Lopez Arias has not been verified. Ruben Duran denied that he ever had discussed the assassination with Elena Guerrero. Eusebio Askew denied that he had discussed President Kennedy with Emilio Carbalido at a party at the Duran's home as alleged by Elena Guerrero. Committee has not been able to verify whether or not guards were posted outside Elena's home in 63 as she claims, but other details of Elena's story are very credible. Perhaps the most striking is the suggestion that Oswald's relationship with Sylvia Duran was more extensive than just the business contacts in the Cuban consulate. Another detail is the manner in which Elena's allegations were handled and the manner in which this committee's attempts to investigate those allegations have been frustrated. In 1965, Elena Guerrero reported that Sylvia Duran had been Oswald's mistress while he was in Mexico City. In 1967, this report was confirmed by a CIA agent who talked to Sylvia Duran. The CIA station did not consider the information significant and told the agent to end his contact with Ms. Duran. If that information is accurate, then Sylvia invited Oswald to a party would not have been that surprising. Sylvia Duran admitted that the Mexican police had questioned her on this point, but denied that she had an affair with Oswald. Ms. Duran denied having any extramarital affairs while she was married to Horacio Duran. This denial is not consistent with evidence of her reputation at the Cuban consulate. A CIA penetration agent there reported to his case officer there that all would have to be done to recruit Sylvia Duran, whom he referred to using the Spanish word for whore, would be to get a blonde, blue-eyed American in bed with her. There is also CIA information that indicates that Sylvia Duran had an affair with a Cuban ambassador to Mexico in the early 1960s. The HSCA attempted to interview the CIA penetration agent about Ms. Duran. An interview with the agent was also desired so as to attempt to verify whether Elena Guerrero had created a disturbance at the Cuban embassy on November 23, 1963. The committee's attempts to interview this agent were frustrated. Ms. Guerrero's claim that she stayed at the Hotel Vermont was verified by the Mexico City legal attaché on October 13, 1966. Ms. Guerrero claimed that she had been held there by Manuel Calvillo, whom she believed worked for the Mexican Ministry of Government. In 1963, Mr. Calvillo was an unwitting asset of the CIA. Unwitting, I bet. Ms. Guerrero claimed that she told Mr. Calvillo her story on November 23, 1963, yet the CIA Mexico City station did not receive a report from Calvillo on this matter until November 24, 1964, the same day that Elena first told her story to the American officials. For these reasons, it was felt that Manuel Calvillo could well be a key to, it says unraveling, but then that's crossed out, and above it says determining the veracity or inaccuracy of Ms. Guerrero's story. The committee's attempt to interview Mr. Calvillo were also frustrated. There is a circumstantial corroboration of Ms. Guerrero's allegations regarding June Cobb Sharp. For example, Ms. Cobb was indeed a CIA agent, and she did file the first report of Ms. Guerrero's story. It should be noted that this first report was accurate in its detail, in that Ms. Guerrero's story remained essentially the same in subsequent repetitions. Ms. Guerrero claimed that she kicked Ms. Cobb out of her house. There is a notation on Ms. Cobb's report that she was not able to regain access to Ms. Guerrero. The committee attempted to obtain an interview with Ms. Cobb, but was once again frustrated. Review the manner in which the CIA Mexico City station and the legal attaché office in Mexico City handled Ms. Guerrero's allegations reveals that, at best, Ms. Guerrero's allegations were handled in an irresponsible manner because they were dismissed after a superficial investigation. The first report came to the CIA was misfiled and forgotten. Misfiled. A lot of that going on there. The legate, after talking to Elena, dismissed her story after interviewing one person whom she said may have been at the party. The manner in which the official American community handled Charles Thomas's reporting is detailed in section 6C11 above. Mr. Thomas speculated in 1969 about why Ms. Guerrero's story had been largely ignored by the American officials in Mexico. Quote, it would appear that whereas the FBI has discounted the Elena Guerrero allegations, the CIA is still considerably disturbed by them. The CIA may not have pressed for further investigation, however, for a number of reasons. One, considering the sensitive overlap and subtle competition between two intelligence collecting agencies, it had to yield to the FBI's clear jurisdiction. Two, there are obvious complications in conducting such an investigation in a foreign country. Three, there is a close and delicate relationship between the CIA station chief and the former Minister of the Interior, President Gustavo Diaz Ordaz. And four, some of the people appearing in the Elena Guerrero scenario may well be agents of the CIA. Under the circumstances, it is unlikely that any further investigation of this matter will ever take place unless it is ordered by a high official in Washington. That's from the Thomas Memorandum, dated 7/25/69, JFK document 11684. Please, pretty please, let's pull this Thomas memorandum dated 7/25/69. The committee's attempt, it says last hope, then was crossed out. Attempt was to locate Elena Garrow. Although the committee established telephonic contact with Ms. Garrow, it was never able to arrange an interview. Consequently, the committee was totally frustrated in this aspect of its investigation, but yet believes that there is a strong possibility that Lee Harvey Oswald did attend a twist party at the home of Reuben Duran. The committee also considers it possible that Lee Harvey Oswald contacted pro-Castro students at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, hereinafter UNAM, as claimed by Oscar Contreras Lartigue. Sylvia Duran admitted that she told Oswald of two ways in which he could get a Cuban visa. One, he could get an in-transit visa by first obtaining a visa to another communist country such as Russia. He could obtain a regular Cuban visa by knowing someone in Cuba who would vouch for him. And then it's possible that after Oswald's attempts to obtain a visa by the first methods were frustrated on Saturday the 28th, that he tried a last-ditch effort to locate someone trusted by the Cuban consulate to vouch for him. There's no direct evidence about how Oswald could have learned of the pro-Castro group at UNAM. Oscar Contreras says that Oswald first contacted him as he was leaving a roundtable discussion at the School of Philosophy. It is known that in '63, the Durans were close friends with the chairman of the philosophy department at UNAM, Richard Guerra, Guerra, who held seminars on Kant, Hegel, and Marx in the Duran's home. It is possible, if Sylvia Duran had more than just a purely business relationship with Oswald, that she referred Oswald to one of the Guerra's Marxist seminars in his search for help. Unfortunately, Contreras does not name who headed the roundtable discussion at which he met Oswald. Sylvia Duran denied that she referred Oswald to anyone for help. Richard Guerra is presently the Mexican ambassador to East Germany and was not available to the committee for an interview. On both of the committee's trips to Mexico, the Mexican government told the committee that Mr. Contreras would be made available for an interview. The interview never occurred. Although the committee's attempt to investigate Mr. Contreras' alleged allegations were met largely with frustration, it's felt that the allegation cannot be dismissed. Was Lee Harvey Oswald alone when he traveled in Mexico? The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald traveled alone when he was in Mexico. All the witnesses, with the exception of Elena Guerra de Paz, who stated that Oswald was accompanied by two beatnik-looking boys. Huh? Hang on a second. Oswald was accompanied by two beatnik-looking boys. Okay. At Reuben Duran's party, have stated that when they saw Oswald in Mexico, he was alone. But yet the committee does not believe that it can readily dismiss Ms. Garrow's allegation that Oswald had a companion in Mexico in light of the corroboration of details of Ms. Garrow's story and the manner in which the American authorities handled the investigation of that story. The possibility that someone impersonated Oswald in Mexico, the similarity in the description of Oswald by Ms. Duran and Mr. Askew, and the description of Oswald's companion by Ms. Garrow. That's it for this document, except there's something pasted in here at the end. It looks like an afterthought that's cut from a book. It says the commission undertook an investigation to determine Oswald's purpose and activities on this journey, with specific reference to reports that Oswald was an agent of the Cuban or Soviet governments. As a result of its investigation, the commission believes that it has been able to reconstruct and explain most of Oswald's actions during that time. Yeah, no, you can't. So that's what the CIA and the commission and everybody believes is Oswald's activities, but they have a bunch of days unaccounted for. They have this contradiction in days, like I said, on this date stamped on his bus ticket back home. There's all kinds of problems here. And so I think at this point we should all have a pretty good understanding of what went on in Mexico City. We'll have a couple more days of some more testimonies and stuff like that, but then we'll move on to something else, I think. Who knows? You never know what we're going to do till I wake up that day. Yes, so we should all be experts on Mexico City, or getting there at least. But thanks, everybody, and I'll be back tomorrow.